The briefing room of No. 403 Squadron was thick with cigarette smoke and the nervous energy of men who knew they might be dead by sunset. It was early 1942, and the Royal Canadian Air Force Squadron, stationed in England, was trying to mold itself into a disciplined fighting unit. But in the corner of the room, sitting apart from the others, was a young man who didn't fit. He didn't have the polished accent of the officers. He didn't have the camaraderie of the sergeants. His uniform looked like he had slept in it. His hair was a mess, and he had a look in his ice blue eyes that made people uncomfortable. It was a look of intense, almost predatory calculation. His flight commander looked at him with a mixture of frustration and disdain. To the RAF establishment, George Beurling was a problem. He was arrogant, he was insubordinate, and he was undisciplined. He refused to fly in formation. He ignored orders. He was, in the eyes of his superiors, a liability who was going to get himself, or worse, his wingman, killed. They wanted to get rid of him. They wanted to wash him out. They had no idea that they were looking at the man who would become the deadliest fighter pilot in the history of the Canadian military. To understand George "Buzz" Beurling, you have to understand that he wasn't fighting the war for king and country. He wasn't fighting for democracy, or freedom, or glory. He was fighting because he was addicted to the physics of killing. Born in Verdun, Quebec, into a deeply religious family, Beurling was an obsessive from the moment he could walk. While other boys played sports, George stared at the sky. He built model airplanes with a fanaticism that worried his parents. He spent every penny he had on flying lessons, skipping school to hang around the local airfield at Cartierville, begging pilots to take him up, washing grease off engine cowlings just to be near the machines. By the time the war broke out in 1939, George Beurling was already a pilot in his soul, even if he didn't have the wings to prove it. He tried to join the Royal Canadian Air Force immediately. He walked into the recruiting office, chest puffed out, ready to serve. They asked for his birth certificate. He was too young. He went home, waited, and tried again. This time, they asked for his educational transcripts. George had dropped out of high school to fly. He didn't have the diploma. The RCAF, obsessed with the idea that pilots needed to be gentlemen with a formal education, rejected him. They told him he wasn't officer material. They told him to go home. But you couldn't tell George Beurling to go home. Rejection didn't discourage him. It just made him desperate. He heard rumors that the Chinese Air Force was accepting foreign volunteers to fight the Japanese. He tried to cross the border to get to San Francisco, but was caught and sent back. He tried to join the Finnish Air Force to fight the Soviets. His parents refused to sign the consent papers. Finally, with the Battle of Britain raging in 1940, the Royal Air Force in England lowered their educational standards. They needed bodies. They didn't care if you had a diploma. They cared if you could see a Heinkel before it bombed London. Beurling didn't have the money for a ticket to England. So, he signed on as a deckhand on a munitions ship. He crossed the Atlantic in a convoy hunted by U-boats, scrubbing decks and vomiting from seasickness, just for the chance to sit in a cockpit. When he docked in Glasgow, he realized he had left his flight logbook the proof of his flying hours back in Canada. Without it, the RAF would make him start from scratch. Most men would have given up. George Beurling walked into the recruiting office, talked his way in, and passed the entrance exams through sheer force of will. He was in. But flight school was where the trouble really began. The RAF training program was designed to produce disciplined, reliable wingmen. They taught formation flying. They taught standard attacks. They taught obedience. Beurling hated all of it. He was a natural pilot, arguably better than his instructors, and he let them know it. When told to fly a steady circuit, he would perform unauthorized aerobatics. When told to stay in formation, he would drift off, hunting for clouds to practice dogfighting against. He was labeled a know-it-all. His instructors noted that he was eccentric and lacking in team spirit. There was one incident that nearly ended his career before it started. During a training flight, eager to test his own reflexes, Beurling decided to fly his trainer aircraft under a bridge. It was a stunt, straight out of a movie, and strictly forbidden. He pulled it off, but he was caught. The disciplinary hearing was severe. He was grounded. He was threatened with a court-martial. It was only the desperate shortage of pilots that saved him. They stripped him of his commission potential and made him a sergeant pilot, a non-commissioned officer. In the rigid class structure of the British military, this meant he was second class. He wasn't an officer and a gentleman. He was hired help. Beurling didn't care about the rank. He cared about the math. while other pilots spent their nights drinking in the mess hall, chasing girls, and trying to forget the war. Beurling sat in his bunk with a notebook. He was analyzing the geometry of air combat. He was obsessed with deflection shooting. He realized that most pilots aimed directly at the enemy plane, which meant that by the time the bullets arrived, the enemy was gone. To kill a plane moving at 300 miles per hour, you had to shoot at empty space. You had to shoot where the plane was going to be. Beurling had a gift that couldn't be taught. He had freakish eyesight. Doctors later confirmed that his vision was significantly better than 20/20. He could spot an enemy aircraft as a speck against the sun long before anyone else. But more than that, his brain processed speed and distance like a computer. He memorized the wingspans of every German aircraft. He knew that a Messerschmitt 109 at 300 yards filled a specific portion of his gun sight. He calculated the bullet drop of his Browning machine guns. He turned aerial slaughter into a trigonometry problem. When he was finally posted to a combat squadron, No. 403, the friction was immediate. The squadron flew sweeps over France, massive formations of Spitfires trying to lure the Luftwaffe into a fight. It was dangerous, confusing work. On his first few missions, Beurling broke the cardinal rule. He left his wingman. He would spot a German plane below and dive, leaving the formation exposed. He got his first kill this way, a Focke-Wulf 190, but when he landed, expecting praise, he was dressed down by his commander. "You are a danger to this squadron, Beurling," he was told. "We don't fight alone, we fight together." Beurling didn't understand. In his mind, the job was to shoot down Germans. He had shot down a German. Why were they angry? He became a pariah. The other pilots avoided him. They called him Screwball, a nickname that started as an insult to his eccentric behavior, his habit of talking to himself in the cockpit, and his intense, wide-eyed stare. He stopped drinking with them. He stopped trying to make friends. He spent his free time shooting stray cats on the airfield with his service revolver to practice his aim, or sitting in the cockpit of his Spitfire on the ground, visualizing kill shots. He was lonely, angry, and frustrated. He felt shackled by the rules of the RAF. He wanted a war where he could be let off the leash. He was about to get his wish. In the summer of 1942, a request came down from headquarters. They needed volunteers for an overseas posting. The destination wasn't specified, but the rumors said it was a place of no return. It was a place where the life expectancy of a pilot was measured in days, not weeks. It was a place where the RAF was outnumbered 10-1. Most pilots with any sense stayed quiet. Beurling stepped forward. He didn't care where it was. He just wanted to go somewhere where there were plenty of Germans and fewer rules. The destination was Malta. Malta was the most bombed place on Earth. A tiny, rocky island in the middle of the Mediterranean. It was a critical, unsinkable aircraft carrier that sat right across the supply lines of Erwin Rommel's Africa Corps. If Malta fell, North Africa would fall, and the Suez Canal would follow. Hitler and Mussolini were determined to crush it. For 2 years, they had pounded the island with relentless air raids. The Royal Navy could barely get supplies through. The civilians were starving, living in limestone caves, eating rats to survive. The fuel was running out. The ammunition was running out. And the air war over Malta was unlike anything in Northern Europe. There were no sweeping formations here. There was no high-altitude chess match. This was a knife fight in a phone booth. The radar warning was short. The German airfields in Sicily were only 20 minutes away. The Luftwaffe would send massive waves of bombers protected by swarms of fighters, and the RAF defenders, a ragtag collection of exhausted pilots flying battered Spitfires, would scramble to meet them. It was desperate. It was chaotic. It was exactly the environment George Beurling was made for. Beurling took off from the deck of the aircraft carrier HMS Eagle on the 9th of June, 1942. He had never flown off a carrier before. He revved the engine of his Spitfire, shot down the deck, and climbed into the blue Mediterranean sky. As he approached the island, he saw the plumes of smoke rising from the Grand Harbor. He saw the craters that pockmarked the limestone. He saw the tracers arching up from the anti-aircraft guns. He was assigned to No. 249 Squadron, based at Takali Airfield. Takali wasn't really an airfield anymore. It was a patch of dust and bomb craters. The pilots lived in blasted-out buildings. They wore shorts and sandals because of the heat. They were gaunt from dysentery and Malta dog, a stomach ailment caused by the poor food. They were a brotherhood of the doomed. When Beurling walked into the mess, Nobody paid him much attention. They had seen plenty of replacements come and go. Most of them died within their first week. The veterans, men like Laddie Lucas and Raoul Dado Langlois, were hard-bitten survivors who had learned to fly defensively, to preserve their aircraft, to survive to fight another day. They looked at the scruffy Canadian with the long hair and the intense eyes and figured he wouldn't last long. But Beurling looked at the situation and smiled. He realized immediately that the rigid discipline of England didn't apply here. In Malta, there was no formation flying in the strict sense. Once the scramble order came, it was a free-for-all. You climbed as fast as you could, you dove into the bomber streams, and you shot at anything with a black cross on it. The officers were too busy flying and dying to worry if your top button was done up or if you saluted properly. On his first few sorties, Beurling spent his time watching. He studied the German tactics. He noticed how the Italian bombers held their formation, while the German escorts, the Messerschmitt, 109 seconds, liked to dive from out of the sun. He noticed the light. The Mediterranean sun was blinding, brighter and harsher than the soft light of England. It created deep shadows and fierce glare. Beurling adjusted his eyes, he adjusted his mind. He began to perfect his deflection shot. In the mess hall, he would grab a piece of chalk and draw diagrams on the floor. If the 109 is banking at 45 degrees and doing 300 knots, he would explain to anyone who would listen. You don't aim at him, you aim here, 5 radii ahead. The other pilots would nod politely, thinking he was crazy. They called it Beurling's maths. They didn't realize he was calculating the precise angle of death. His first kill over Malta came on July 6th. He was on patrol when he spotted a group of Italian bombers escorted by fighters. Most pilots would have attacked the bombers. They were slow, easy targets. Beurling went for the fighters. He singled out an Italian Mach-E C, 202. He closed the distance, ignoring the return fire. He didn't open fire at 400 yards, or 300. He waited. He waited until the enemy plane filled his windscreen. He waited until he could see the rivets on the enemy fuselage. Then, he fired a 2-second burst. The Mach-E disintegrated. It didn't just smoke. It ceased to be an airplane. Beurling had hit the fuel tank and the pilot simultaneously. He pulled up, rolled his Spitfire, and spotted another. He dove again. Another short burst. Another kill. When he landed, he was shaking with adrenaline. He walked into the intelligence officer's tent to file his report. He described the kills with a clinical, cold precision that unnerved the officer. He didn't talk about the excitement of the dogfight. He talked about angles. He talked about the number of rounds expended. He talked about the splash of the bullets on the metal skin of the enemy plane. The word started to spread around the airfield. The Screwball wasn't just crazy, he was dangerous. But the true test was yet to come. The Germans were preparing a massive offensive to finally crush Malta. The sky was about to turn black with enemy planes. And George Beurling, the outcast, the reject, the man with the notebook full of trigonometry, was about to step onto the stage he had been waiting for his entire life. The RAF had tried to break him. Now, they were going to beg him to save them. July 1942 on Malta was a furnace. The limestone rock radiated heat, the dust clogged the engines, and the constant wail of the air raid sirens shredded the nerves of the population. But in this hellscape, George Beurling found his paradise. While other pilots were losing weight from stress and dysentery, shrinking inside their flight suits, Beurling seemed to thrive. He was finally in an environment where the only thing that mattered was the result. The polite society of the RAF officers' mess in England, with its unwritten rules of decorum and class, was a million miles away. Here, rank was irrelevant. If you could keep the Germans off your tail and bring your Spitfire home, you were a king. And Beurling was becoming royalty. His Screwball nickname, once a pejorative term for an eccentric loner, began to morph into a badge of honor. The other pilots watched him with a mixture of awe and disbelief. They saw him land after a sortie, his face covered in oil and sweat, his blue eyes wide and manic, recounting the battle with his hands. He wouldn't say, "I shot him down." He would say, "I put a 2-second burst into his glycol tank at a 15-degree deflection angle from 300 yards. He was a surgeon of the sky. While most pilots would spray bullets in a hosepipe fashion, hoping for a hit, Beurling fired in short, lethal bursts. He treated his 303 ammunition like it was gold dust. It was not uncommon for him to return from a mission having shot down 2 or 3 enemy aircraft while still having half his ammunition left in the trays. This efficiency was born of his obsession. He spent his hours on the ground, sitting in his cockpit, harmonizing, his guns aligning them to converge at a specific point. The standard RAF convergence was 400 yards. Beurling thought that was for cowards. He set his to 250 yards. He wanted to get close. He wanted to be so close he could see the panic in the enemy pilot's eyes. He developed a terrifying intimacy with the act of killing. He told his squadron mates that he didn't aim for the cockpit to kill the man. He aimed for the engine or the fuel tank. The machine is the target, he would say, though he admitted that meat on the table, killing the pilot was the surest way to stop the plane. The climax of his prowess came on July 27, 1942. It was a day that would be etched into the history of aerial warfare. The morning began with a massive raid by the Regia Aeronautica, the Italian Air Force, escorted by German fighters. Beurling scrambled into the blinding sun. Within minutes, he found a victim. He spotted a Mach C-202, the premier Italian fighter, separated from its wingman. Beurling dove. The Italian pilot saw him and broke hard to the left, a standard evasive maneuver. But Beurling had already calculated the break. He fired into the empty space where the Mach was turning. The bullets in the plane met perfectly. The Italian fighter exploded. Before the debris had even hit the water, Beurling was climbing again. He spotted a Messerschmitt Bf 109 diving on a fellow Spitfire. He rolled his aircraft, pulled high Gs that would have caused a normal man to black out, and slotted in behind the German. One burst. The 109 smoked and plummeted. 2 kills before breakfast. But the day wasn't over. In the afternoon, the Luftwaffe returned in force. This time, they brought their aces. Among the enemy formation was Captain Furio Nicolot Doglio, a celebrated Italian ace with the gold medal for military valor, and his wingman. They were flying Mach 202 seconds, arguably more maneuverable than the battered Spitfires the Canadians were flying. Beurling spotted them. He was outnumbered, but he saw an opportunity. Doglio was focused on another Spitfire, unaware of the shark closing in from his blind spot. Beurling's approach was a masterclass in physics. He was coming in fast, too fast for a standard tail chase. If he fired now, he would overshoot. So, he used the deflection shot he had practiced in his mind 1,000 times. He aimed his nose well ahead of the Italian ace, pulling the trigger while his own plane was in a violent bank. The cannon shells arched through the air, intercepting Doglio's fighter. It was a violent, catastrophic impact. The Italian ace was killed instantly, his plane shearing apart. Beurling then turned his attention to the wingman, Faliero Massane. In a matter of seconds, Massane's aircraft was also a flaming wreck. 4 kills in one day. In the span of a few hours, the undisciplined Outcast had done more damage to the Axis air forces than most squadrons did in a month. When he landed, the ground crews looked at his plane. It was virtually untouched. He walked into the mess hall, grabbed a glass of water, and sat down with his notebook to critique his own performance. He was disappointed, he told them, because on the 3rd kill, he had wasted 10 rounds. By August, George Beurling was no longer just a pilot, he was a propaganda weapon. The press back in Canada and Britain got wind of the Falcon of Malta. They loved the story. The handsome, blue-eyed boy from Quebec, the lone wolf, the David fighting the Goliath of the Luftwaffe. They didn't know about his insubordination. They didn't know that he was socially awkward and refused to salute officers he didn't respect. They just knew he was winning. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Medal, then a bar to it, then the Distinguished Flying Cross, and finally the Distinguished Service Order. The medals piled up, but Beurling didn't care about the ribbons. He kept them stuffed in his pocket or tossed in a drawer. But the strain of the siege was taking its toll. Beurling was losing weight rapidly. His face was gaunt, his ribs showing through his skin. He was suffering from chronic dysentery. He couldn't sleep. The adrenaline that had fueled him for months was burning him out. He became even more withdrawn, spending hours reading the Bible his mother had given him. He wasn't reading it for comfort. He was reading it with the same intensity he applied to flying, memorizing passages, looking for patterns. The other pilots gave him a wide berth. He was their savior. But he was also a ghost haunting the airfield. On October 14th, 1942, the luck finally ran out. It was the height of the October Blitz, the Luftwaffe's final, desperate attempt to bomb Malta into submission. Beurling scrambled to intercept a massive formation of Ju-88 bombers and Bf-109 escorts. He shot down a bomber almost immediately. Then he turned and destroyed a 109. But in the chaos of the melee, he broke his own rule. He lost situational awareness. A German fighter dropped out of the sun, unseen. Cannon shells ripped through Beurling's Spitfire, the cockpit filled with shrapnel. One round smashed into his throttle hand. Another tore through the floor and obliterated his right heel. His aircraft was a flaming coffin, spinning out of control toward the Mediterranean. In agony, with blood filling his boot and his hand mangled, Beurling managed to jettison the canopy. He unstrapped his harness. The centrifugal force pinned him to the seat, but he fought it, clawing his way out of the burning cockpit at 18,000 feet. He fell into the cool air, pulling his ripcord. As he drifted down, bleeding, he watched his Spitfire crash into the sea. He landed in the water, the salt stinging his open wounds. He floated there for hours, clutching his Bible which he kept in his battle dress, waiting for the rescue launch. When they fished him out, he was pale and barely conscious, but alive. His war over Malta was over. His score stood at 27 confirmed kills in just 14 days of actual combat flying. It was a record that defied logic. But death wasn't done trying to claim George Beurling. The RAF decided he was too valuable to lose and ordered him back to Canada for a bond drive. He was loaded onto a B-24 Liberator transport plane for the flight to Gibraltar. On the approach to the runway in Gibraltar, in terrible weather, the bomber's engines failed. The massive aircraft crashed into the sea and broke apart. Of the 19 men on board, 16 were killed instantly. George Beurling, the man with the shattered heel, swam out of the wreckage. He swam 150 yards to shore in the dark, dragging another survivor with him. He washed up on the beach, soaked in oil, shaken, but miraculously alive. It solidified the legend. He was the unkillable man. When he finally returned to Canada, he was greeted as a national hero. There were parades in Montreal. Politicians wanted to shake his hand. The Prime Minister wanted a photo op. But this was where the tragedy of George Beurling truly began. He was a warrior who had been pulled out of the arena. He hated the speeches. He hated the crowds. When reporters asked him what it felt like to shoot down a plane, they expected a noble answer about duty and defending freedom. Beurling looked them in the eye and said, "It's a great feeling. You see the strikes. You see the pieces fly off. I like to kill." The press recoiled. The RCAF brass was horrified. This wasn't the clean-cut hero they wanted to sell war bonds. This was a killer. They tried to sideline him. They made him an instructor, hoping to keep him out of the public eye. But Beurling was a terrible instructor. He had no patience for students who couldn't see the air the way he did. He terrified them. He mocked them. He eventually transferred to the RCAF reserves, drifting, unhappy, a man who had peaked at 21 years old. He tried to go back to combat in 1944, flying Mustangs over Europe, but the spark was gone. The war had changed. It was no longer the lone wolf dogfighting of Malta. It was massive, disciplined formations again. He chafed under the rules. He scored a few more kills, bringing his total to 31, but he eventually resigned his commission before the war ended. He couldn't be a soldier. He could only be a fighter. When the war ended in 1945, George Beurling was lost. He was 24 years old, a civilian with no high school diploma, no trade, and a skill set that was only useful for murder. He drifted from job to job. He slept on park benches. He was married and divorced quickly. He told friends that he had ice water in his veins and couldn't feel anything anymore. The peace was killing him faster than the Germans ever could. Then, in 1948, a final call came. The new state of Israel was fighting for its survival. They had no air force. They were scraping together mercenaries, old planes, and anyone who could fly. It was a desperate, chaotic, high-stakes war, exactly the kind George Beurling loved. He volunteered immediately. The Israelis were thrilled. They were getting the legendary Falcon of Malta. He traveled to Rome, where he was scheduled to ferry a Norseman transport plane to the war zone. On the 20th of May 1948, George Beurling walked across the tarmac at Urbe Airport in Rome. He climbed into the cockpit. He did his pre-flight checks. He looked ready, perhaps for the first time in years. He revved the engine. But as the plane began to taxi, a massive explosion tore it apart. The aircraft was engulfed in a fireball. George Beurling was burned beyond recognition. The official report said it was a carburetor fire, but the rumors started immediately and never stopped. Was it sabotage? Had the Arabs planted a bomb to stop the world's deadliest ace from reaching Israel? Had the British intelligence service intervened? Or was it just the final, cruel joke of the mechanics of flight that he had loved so much? The mystery was never solved. George Beurling died as he had lived, violently, mysteriously, and surrounded by airplanes. He was 26 years old. He was buried in Rome, but years later, his body was moved to Israel, where he was laid to rest in a hero's cemetery, a soldier for a country he never stepped foot in. In the end, the RAF was right. George Beurling was undisciplined. He was an outcast. He was arrogant, difficult, and impossible to command. But for those few burning months over the scorched rock of Malta, when the fate of the war hung by a thread, he was exactly what the world needed. He wasn't a gentleman. He was a natural-born predator who found his purpose in the sky, a man who turned the chaos of war into a cold, beautiful equation, and saved an island because he simply refused to miss.